Are there memorable dealer visits or dealer stories that you did in those days on farm equipment that come to mind?
They were. I don't remember all the names because it's been that long. And many of those dealers are gone now because of what's happened. I know Bill Kibble out here in Minnesota. There's a story about that when I came back to farm equipment in the 90s as a freelance editor. The next phase of farm equipment was precision ag and discussing GPS. Well, Bill, I think, had hired an ex-Army guy who was a GPS expert. And we had interviewed him and talked about what does this really mean? Because no one knew. You could get a pretty map, but what could really happen? And so we were trying to make sense of what's really going to happen and what kind of training. I remembered going to events. This may be back in the 80s, different things coming together with technology, because not only were we doing the computers in the dealership, but black boxes were showing up in equipment. My favorite story is I was at an event, maybe an FIEI event, and a company that will remain nameless was telling the story about how they were looking at service returns of black boxes from tractors. And 90%, I believe this is number, a high percentage of the black boxes that were returned that were not working were tested out fine. They had a training problem. This is 86 or 87. They had a training problem and they knew it. A dealer would just say, it's the black box, we'll put in a new one and send the old one back for warranty. Well, that's a warranty claim problem. Oops. So they had to go back and do the training on diagnostics, and this company knew that was where they had to go next. So then we get into the 90s. The next step is precision ag. Well, we all know where that's going and where training is there. And I was writing about some of those early days of dealers engaging some of this equipment and not understanding. 96, 90, this would be 95. We were getting yield maps. Ag Leader was out there doing well. But then it's like, okay, now what do I do? What's the next step? And those were interesting times just covering those. And not specific dealers, but it's fun with all the dealers. I remember them just trying to engage these changes because they knew the electronic side of their business was changing in everything they touched. And it was pretty interesting to be around that.
Were there, you went on and had a very wildly successful career. Were there been things that you learned during your farm equipment times that you would say calibrated how you approached your job, or you learned during that time that you could point back to?
Pretty much, yes. Well, especially in equipment, partly just knowing the people. But the other thing that calibrated me was to understand, like I said, to understand how it works. Farmers don't understand how the farm equipment business works. The dealer is always the enemy. See, for the dealer, the company's always the enemy. For the farmer, the dealer's always the enemy. How's this work, right? That dealer's screwing me over with that. What's this $100 charge for an hour of work? It's like, so, and that's kind of the negative. So I would get into these conversations. I think my favorite thing is, and I got this out of farm equipment, and it came from understanding the economics of the business, spending enough time with some pretty high level people at different companies over the early years. Then when I got into this conversation at farm equipment, the best example was at Farm Progress. My favorite story was I had an editor who went to a product launch and he'd never been to one. By the way, just having equipment knowledge is an important thing. We're going to an equipment launch, but that's another story. This editor goes and he comes back and he goes, this is a great piece of equipment, but no farmer can afford it. And that's when he got Willie Voigt's lecture on the value and marketing of equipment. I said, one, this product boosts the farmer's individual performance 50%. It did. Two, this company doesn't make equipment that doesn't sell. Even if it's a $700,000 piece of equipment, and this was 20 years ago, they know who's going to buy that equipment. So and he said, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it's like, well, that's the whole point. Look at the economics of that piece of equipment. And that's what farm equipment taught me, was to think about the full structure of the business. It's like a major company is not going to say to a dealer, hey, look, we got 20 of these, you could sell them. They've talked to the dealer. The dealers helped build that machine. The dealers brought in farmers to help build that machine. So, and I look at where Deere took the cotton business. You talk about revolutions. I came out of farm equipment right into when that was happening when I joined Farm Progress. And it was fascinating that when you talk to a cotton farmer today, you see very few game changers in your your history. Bill Fogarty would tell you about deer in Dallas, 1960, and what that was about. That was one. The cotton thing was one. Magnum was one. Actually, the Maxim tractor is a bigger deal than Magnum because Maxim's actually the first combine tractor, which was an interesting story. But those little things, and in 43 years of writing about farming and 35 years of writing about farm equipment, the high points were fun. It was cool to see stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. I have a product launch story I have to tell that was one of my favorites of yours. And actually, my dad and I have used it to try to teach other editors how to work a product launch. And this would have been probably 04, 05. We were down in Goodyear at the Case Big Red Roundup, I think they called it, maybe.
Yeah.
And it was clear they were keeping us as media away from all farmers, and there were a handful of dealers there. They were keeping us away. And you weren't at the receptions and stuff. You were working like Willie Bolt works a room, right? So I remember their PR person and a female, Claudia, you'd remember.
Oh, Claudia. Yes. I love Claudia.
Yeah. While we were talking to them, you'd asked a question about the problem with the new combine. And this farmer turned and said, well, the Case IH people told us we're not talking at all about this, but here's what I'm going to say. And he went in and telling, Claudia's face went red because it had gotten out of the box that they put a gag order on all the farmers talking to the trade media there. But you got your story, I know.
It was exciting. It was, I came onto this company that had its own private plane, and we would take trips. And Johnson Hill in the mid 80s was really going publisher. And at one point in Wisconsin, for a while, if you talk to anybody in media, they either worked at Johnson Hill or were going to go work at Johnson. I mean, they were a hopping company. And honest to God, we were in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, a town I wouldn't move to. The thing that was interesting about that time was that energy. Pellegrin had was doing a lot of stuff with there was a lot of energy in the building, trying to create new things. They moved farm equipment. We became number one in the market for what the market was trying to do. Feed and Grain Times was doing something like that. They built a rental market. Their rental coverage was really good. The pro business with pro landscape and stuff. Eventually I ended up freelancing for a lot of those in the early 90s. OEM Off Highway, which is a book that I became the first editor of too, and ran that book, learned a lot about manufacturing. Oh my God, if I did more world-class manufacturing stories, that was crazy. Back in the days of, we actually got inside a company during their ISO 9000 inspection and spent a week with them off and on, and then wrote about that for back when ISO was a big deal. So,
it was tough to write about ISO and make it interesting. I went through that in manufacturing myself too, but that was a huge initiative in the early 90s.
Well, if you got into someone's business, if you could get them to open the doors, and we did, we met the inspectors, we went through the process, and they said, okay, now we're going to be here for a couple of days. So I went and did stories somewhere else. And then I came back at the end. I can't remember where it was now. It's been so long. And they went through a final check and found two things. I mean, a random file check found two discrepancies and they fixed them. But it was just an interesting story about how the process works and how good the process was. Because a lot of companies were wondering if they needed it, the certification. Now you know how big a deal that is. And then going from there. So it's great to be in the industry and cover the things. I mean, when I came to Farm Progress, so we talk about precision ag, and then we followed that when I came to Farm Progress. The other big thing in Farm Progress was all the new engines and covering the stage from tier 2 all the way to tier 4 final, and following that process and writing about it for the decade that it happened. That was fun too. So this is a great business. What you've done with it, what you've done with farm equipment, precision farming dealer, which I think is once a year, but still deals with a really serious topic. One we tried to cover, and we were in the early days. I mean, good Lord, I think Deere had just brought out those silly brown boxes, and something they walked away from and stepped back and then came forward again to get back into it. But yeah, going back to the early days, Jim Rank traveling by company plane to the 3i show and being with, Arlette Sams and doing conversations and just great salespeople. And one thing that did teach me is we can have a wall with sales as a journalist, but still work with that salesperson to make sure that they know stuff you may not have heard. Okay. A salesperson may be in a conversation with a client and go, hey, did you know that so-and-so is going to do this at such and such? I'm like, no. But then I can make a follow-up call and say, hey, you were talking to Jim and he mentioned such and such. And oh yeah, we're excited. We're going to do this. It's like, yeah, you could have called, but you told Jim, and that's a starting point. Because if you keep the wall should be more of a screen sometimes where you can talk to the screen and not give up your ethics. You're not doing anything wrong to talk to somebody in sales. And sometimes it's good to set sales straight and say, if you ever tell a company that I'm going to write about them just because they bought an ad, you and I are having a very bad day. That kind of the fun part of the business. Right. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. Jim was never that. Jim never did that. Just, never. So
yeah, Jim passed away about a year and a half ago, I think.
Yeah, I heard. It was sad.
But Don Henning, I still talk to him all the time. Arlette recently retired. Yeah. I think she's enjoying life, but now you get to sit in that chair and reflect back and enjoy your retirement. And you've got grandchildren, right?
Yeah, I do. I have 2 grandsons. One turned six this month. The other one will be 10 in December. And I'm planning to be around. I'm looking at doing some speeches, doing some traveling, and open to freelance on my own terms, but depends on what it is. Yeah. I've got a little FOMO as I've retired because fear of missing out. Because the last Agritechnica I was at was 2019. I had planned to go when they were going to do it in 21 till they canceled it. I'm even in my hotel room. And it's like, now they're going to do it this year. And I'm like, I could have waited. And then of course I've been doing CES. I've been doing CES since 2019 and I'm going to miss. Those are the 2 big shows. Obviously Farm Progress Show and Husker Harvest Days are misses for me too, but I'm not going to anything. So that's the way it is. Yeah. But unless somebody pays me, that's a different story. Yeah. But I tell you what, the legacy of farm equipment is the dealer's always number one in the business. And I learned that when I was doing custom publishing on the other side of Johnson Hill, because the dealers paid for the newsletters we were sending to their customers, Checkerboard newsletter and DeLaval. So the dealer was never the enemy. And that was something that I learned of how valuable the dealer is in all of this, and that they need all the support that they can muster because there are waves of change against them. And so I respect every farm equipment dealer. I've been driving by some, it's been scary what's not on the lot, knowing the lifeblood of this business. And you drive by a dealership in April and there isn't a combine anywhere or a good tractor. It's like, wow, how are you making money? So it's challenging, and so I wish the dealers out there all the luck in the world, because farm equipment's there to support you.